In the intricate dance of the human mind, critical thinking stands as the rhythm that guides every intelligent move, every thoughtful pause, and every deliberate decision we make. This chapter unfolds as the kaka, the blueprint of critical thinking mastery, understanding thought patterns for personal improvement. Chapter 1. Every great transformation begins not in the world around us, but in the quiet corridors of the human mind, where thought awakens to its own existence. The first step toward critical thinking is awareness, the realization that the mind, for much of our lives, has been operating on autopilot, shaped by others, guided by emotions, and driven by invisible patterns we rarely question. We inherit beliefs from our families, cultures, religions, and environments. We absorb them like air, breathing in ideas that become part of us without ever pausing to ask whether they are true. This unexamined acceptance builds a comfortable illusion of understanding, yet it also becomes the cage that limits our growth. The awakening of the mind begins when we dare to look within and ask, "Why do I think the way I think?" That single question, simple as it sounds, carries the power to shake the very foundation of our identity. In that moment of honest inquiry, the mind begins to wake from its sleep. You start to see that every assumption, every judgment, every emotional reaction is not random. It is the echo of your conditioning. Your thoughts are not always your own. They are shaped by repetition, habit, and memory. When you realize this, you take your first conscious step toward freedom. Critical thinking is not about cynicism or constant doubt. It is about awareness, the gentle but firm practice of noticing what your mind is doing and why. Imagine your thoughts as clouds drifting across the sky. Most people spend their lives trapped inside those clouds, lost in emotion, unable to see clearly. But the moment you learn to observe without judgment, you rise above the clouds and witness the vastness of the sky itself. That sky, clear, boundless, and open, is the awakened mind. The process of awakening is uncomfortable, for it exposes how often we have believed things simply because they were familiar. We start to see how fear, pride, and the desire to belong have guided our decisions more than reason ever did. It is humbling to admit how easily we are influenced, how quickly we accept authority, how often we mistake repetition for truth. But that humility is the foundation of wisdom. The awakened mind does not seek comfort in certainty, it seeks clarity in understanding. To awaken means to think for yourself, not against the world, but beyond it. It means daring to stand in the quiet space between what you've been told and what you truly know. It means taking responsibility for your thoughts, your interpretations, and your conclusions. For every opinion you hold, there is a story behind it, and until you explore that story, you are not thinking, you are repeating. Awareness transforms repetition into reflection. When you pause before reacting, when you question before agreeing, you begin to reshape your mental landscape. Suddenly, your mind becomes a workshop instead of a warehouse, a place of creation, not storage. You no longer just absorb information, you filter, evaluate, and understand it. This awakening is not about intelligence or education. Even the most learned minds can remain asleep within their own biases. True awakening is about consciousness, about reclaiming ownership of your thought process. Once you begin to see your thoughts as patterns rather than facts, you gain power over them. You realize that emotions are signals, not commands, that beliefs can evolve, that understanding is not a destination but a continuous journey. The awakened mind is alive with curiosity, open to new ideas yet anchored in reason. It listens deeply, observes quietly, and speaks thoughtfully. It is not afraid to be wrong, for it knows that every mistake is a doorway to greater truth. This chapter, the beginning of your journey toward critical thinking mastery, is not just an introduction. It is an invitation to awaken. It calls you to watch your own mind as if seeing it for the first time. Notice the thoughts that come uninvited, the reactions that arise without cause, the judgments that form before facts appear. That observation, silent, patient, and consistent, is the seed of all wisdom. To awaken the mind is to become the observer of your own consciousness, to see thinking as an activity, not an identity. You are not your thoughts, you are the awareness behind them, and when that awareness grows, confusion fades, and clarity begins to shine. The moment you start seeing how your mind moves, you gain the power to direct it. You become not a prisoner of your thinking, but its master. This awakening is not a single moment, but a lifelong practice, a daily commitment to self-awareness, reflection, and understanding. It demands honesty, courage, and patience. But the reward is profound: a mind that is your ally, not your enemy, a consciousness that guides rather than controls you. As this journey unfolds, remember this truth: awareness is the birthplace of all transformation. Without it, no progress is possible. With it, even the most chaotic mind can become clear. The awakened thinker sees the world not as it appears, but as it truly is, filtered through neither fear nor desire, but through the calm light of understanding. And so, as Chapter 1 closes, your journey begins. The journey from unconscious existence to conscious living, from belief to understanding, from illusion to truth. This is the awakening of the mind, the first and most essential step in the mastery of thought. Chapter 2, the true power of the human mind, begins with the courage to question everything, for questioning is the spark that ignites all understanding, the quiet rebellion against ignorance, and the foundation of every form of wisdom that has ever existed. To think critically, one must first dare to ask, not just others but oneself, the questions that reveal what lies beneath belief, emotion, and assumption. Most people move through life collecting answers without ever questioning the questions themselves. But the thinker, the awakened seeker, learns that inquiry is the beginning of freedom. Every discovery in science, philosophy, or self-awareness has been born from someone who refused to accept what was handed to them as truth. In that refusal, there is not arrogance but bravery, the bravery to say, "I must understand this for myself." The habit of questioning transforms the mind from a passive receiver into an active creator, one that does not settle for surface-level explanations but seeks to penetrate the essence of things. When you begin to question deeply, you realize that most of what you know has never truly been tested. You believe what you believe because someone taught you to, because it felt comfortable, or because everyone else seemed to agree. But agreement does not make truth, and comfort does not guarantee understanding. True thinkers learn to ask, is this real or is it merely familiar? That question alone has the power to separate illusion from insight. Every unexamined belief acts like a chain on the mind, but every genuine question is a key that loosens it. The art of questioning everything is not about rejecting all ideas or doubting life endlessly. It is about engaging with the world consciously. It means that before you accept a statement, you examine its logic. Before you follow a tradition, you understand its purpose. Before you react emotionally, you ask what your feeling is trying to tell you. Through this process, questioning becomes not just a tool of knowledge, but a mirror of the soul. It reflects the strength of your curiosity, the honesty of your intent, and the depth of your understanding. Questioning requires humility because it means admitting that you do not know. And yet, in that admission lies the door to knowing. Only the mind that can say, "I don't understand," can ever learn. The closed mind protects its pride, the open mind protects its growth. Asking questions reveals the architecture of your thinking. It teaches you how your mind works, where it jumps to conclusions, where it avoids discomfort, where it settles for easy answers. Every time you question a thought, you sharpen the blade of your awareness. You start to notice the difference between an opinion and a fact, between emotion and evidence, between inherited knowledge and earned wisdom. The more you practice this, the more your perception refines itself. You begin to see how society often discourages deep questioning, how schools, systems, and even relationships sometimes reward obedience over thought. But the great thinkers of history, Socrates, Buddha, Einstein, and every visionary who moved the world, all began by asking the questions no one else would. They understood that questioning is not an act of rebellion against the world, but a devotion to truth. Each time you question, you peel away another layer of illusion. You see that reality is not what others tell you it is. It is what you discover for yourself through reasoning, reflection, and observation. And when you make this practice a habit, your thinking evolves from imitation to creation. You no longer live by borrowed ideas. You become the architect of your own understanding, but questioning must be guided by intention. Without discipline, questions can lead to confusion instead of clarity. True questioning is purposeful. It seeks insight, not chaos. The goal is not to destroy belief, but to strengthen it through evidence. To question effectively, you must listen deeply, observe without bias, and remain open to changing your mind. A true thinker celebrates being proven wrong, for every correction brings them closer to truth. When you question with sincerity, you dismantle the illusions of certainty that cloud most minds. You begin to see how often people defend ideas not because they are right, but because they are afraid to be wrong. The thinker, however, finds peace in uncertainty, for it is in uncertainty that exploration begins. To question everything is to live with curiosity, to replace fear with wonder, and to understand that every answer is temporary, a stepping stone to deeper truth. It is to see knowledge not as a possession, but as a journey. When you learn to ask, why, without fear, without pride, and what if, without hesitation, you train your mind to see beyond appearances. Life itself becomes your classroom, and every experience your teacher. The simple act of questioning transforms ordinary moments into opportunities for insight. It helps you uncover hidden assumptions in arguments, biases in opinions, and emotions disguised as logic. It frees you from manipulation because a questioning mind cannot be easily controlled. It allows you to build wisdom that is truly your own. Questioning also deepens empathy. When you ask why others think or feel the way they do, you expand your understanding beyond yourself. You begin to see that everyone's beliefs are built from their own experiences, fears, and hopes. This recognition creates compassion, even for those who disagree with you. Through questioning, you connect intellect with humanity. Ultimately, the power of questioning everything is not about dismantling life, but about rebuilding it consciously. It is about creating a relationship with truth that is dynamic, alive, and evolving. When you question your own thoughts, you open the door to self-mastery. You learn that wisdom does not come from having all the answers, but from never stopping the search for them. This is the heart of critical thinking, a mind unafraid to ask, unafraid to doubt, and unafraid to learn. To question everything is to awaken from the dream of certainty and step into the reality of understanding. It is to live with awareness, guided not by habit but by insight, not by authority but by truth. The one who questions is the one who grows, and the one who grows is the one who truly lives. See HTR 3. The greatest obstacle to clear thinking is not ignorance but illusion, the invisible biases and distortions that quietly shape the way we see the world, often without our awareness. The mind, though powerful, is not a perfect lens. It bends and colors reality through the influence of past experiences, fears, and desires. To think critically, we must first confront the fact that our perceptions are not pure reflections of truth, but interpretations filtered through countless layers of conditioning. Escaping mental bias is one of the most difficult yet essential steps in mastering the art of thought, for bias is not always loud or obvious. It often whispers in the background of our reasoning, convincing us that we are objective when, in truth, we are being led by emotion and assumption. The illusion of certainty is perhaps the most dangerous of all, for it blinds us to the possibility that we could be wrong. Confirmation bias makes us seek information that supports what we already believe, while rejecting anything that challenges it. We scroll through media that agrees with us, follow people who think like us, and defend opinions as if they were parts of our identity. In doing so, we trap ourselves inside mental echo chambers, where every reflection only reinforces what we already think. True freedom of thought begins when we dare to question our own conclusions, when we can say with honesty, "Perhaps I do not see this clearly." The mind resists this humility because it equates being wrong with being weak, yet in truth, the ability to recognize bias is a sign of strength. Every human being carries cognitive biases, shortcuts the brain uses to save time, to simplify complexity, to avoid discomfort. But these shortcuts often lead to flawed reasoning. We assume causation when there is only coincidence. We overestimate our understanding, we favor the familiar over the true, and we interpret new information through old beliefs. To escape these illusions, we must become observers of our thinking rather than servants to it. Imagine your thoughts as actors on a stage. Your awareness is the audience, quietly watching, noting which characters dominate the story. When anger, pride, or fear enters the scene, your awareness recognizes their presence and resists being swept away by their performance. This act of observation creates distance between you and your bias, allowing reason to breathe where reaction once ruled. One of the most subtle biases is emotional reasoning, the belief that because you feel something strongly, it must be true. Feelings are powerful guides to what matters to us, but they are not reliable judges of truth. A person who feels offended might believe they have been wronged, even when no harm was intended. A person who feels certain may simply be emotionally attached to their belief. Critical thinkers learn to honor emotions without surrendering to them. They listen to the feeling, identify its message, but then return to evidence and logic before making judgment. Another common distortion is groupthink, the instinct to align with the majority for safety or belonging. Throughout history, humanity's greatest errors have often been collective ones, not individual ones. Entire societies have believed in false ideas because questioning them meant social exile. To think independently requires courage, the courage to stand apart, to risk misunderstanding, and to seek truth even when it costs comfort. But independence of thought does not mean arrogance. It means a quiet confidence grounded in reflection and humility. Escaping illusion also involves acknowledging the limits of perception. The human brain does not record reality like a camera, it interprets it like an artist. Two people can experience the same event and remember it differently, not because one lies, but because each mind filters the world through personal meaning. Recognizing this subjectivity does not weaken truth. It deepens it, reminding us that every perspective is partial. When we bring multiple perspectives together with open minds, we move closer to understanding. Another subtle bias is the halo effect, where one positive trait blinds us to flaws, or the reverse, where one negative detail eclipses merit. We do this with people, ideas, even ourselves. Critical thinking demands that we see without exaggeration, not glorifying, not demonizing, but perceiving with balance. To free the mind from illusion, we must train it in fairness. Each time you find yourself certain, pause, ask, what evidence would prove me wrong? Am I defending truth or protecting my ego? This discipline weakens bias and strengthens clarity. You learn to hold beliefs lightly, firm enough to guide you, but flexible enough to change when truth demands it. Escaping illusion also means embracing the discomfort of doubt. Doubt, though unpleasant, is not the enemy of truth, it is its guardian. It prevents blind belief and keeps the mind alive, curious, and humble. The thinker who doubts wisely walks closer to wisdom than the one who believes blindly. Escaping mental bias does not mean erasing all emotion or preference. It means learning to see through them. It means allowing emotion to speak but not to decide, allowing memory to inform but not to control. It means recognizing that every thought carries a trace of the thinker's past, and that true objectivity is an ideal we approach but never fully reach. The purpose of critical thinking is not perfection but progress, the gradual refinement of perception through awareness. Each time you identify a bias, you weaken its hold. Each time you admit a distortion, you strengthen your integrity. Over time, clarity becomes your natural state. You no longer rush to defend your opinions, for you value understanding more than being right. You begin to see the world as a dynamic system of perspectives, each holding a fragment of truth. This awareness brings peace, for it ends the inner war between certainty and reality. Escaping illusion is not a single victory but a daily practice. It requires mindfulness, honesty, and the willingness to see yourself as you are, not as you wish to be. Yet the reward is immense. A mind that perceives clearly, a heart that responds wisely, and a life guided not by illusion but by truth. In the mastery of thought, clarity is liberation, and to escape the prison of bias is to reclaim the full power of your mind. For centuries, human beings have misunderstood the relationship between logic and emotion, treating them as rivals locked in eternal conflict, one representing reason and discipline, the other chaos and impulse. Yet the truth is far more nuanced and profound. Logic and emotion are not enemies, but partners, two essential forces that, when balanced, create the harmony of a wise and compassionate mind. To master critical thinking, one must learn to balance these two dimensions of human experience, for pure logic without feeling becomes cold and disconnected, while pure emotion without reasoning becomes reckless and unstable. Logic is the architect of understanding, building structure and coherence from the chaos of thought. Emotion is the energy that gives those structures meaning, driving purpose and motivation. The mind guided by logic alone may see clearly but feel nothing. The mind ruled by emotion alone may feel deeply but see nothing clearly. True mastery lies in integration, to let logic lead, but let emotion breathe. Emotions are not the enemies of reason. They are signals from the subconscious, the language of the body, and the voice of experience. Every feeling, whether joy or fear, anger or compassion, carries a message about your values, boundaries, and needs. When you suppress emotion in the name of rationality, you cut yourself off from a vital source of intelligence. But when you let emotion dictate thought, you lose the clarity that keeps judgment fair. The art of critical thinking is learning to listen to emotions without becoming enslaved by them, to translate their language into understanding, and to integrate that understanding into reasoned judgment. Imagine emotion as the flame and logic as the lantern. Emotion gives warmth and light, but without the structure of logic, the flame can consume rather than illuminate. To achieve inner balance, we must first recognize how emotions influence thinking, often in invisible ways. A person filled with anger will interpret facts differently than one filled with peace. A person afraid of loss will perceive risk even where none exists. Emotions color perception, and perception shapes reality. Thus, self-awareness becomes the foundation of balance. When an emotion arises, the critical thinker observes it, not with judgment but with curiosity. What is this feeling trying to tell me? Is it based on truth or on fear? Is it guiding me or clouding me? This moment of observation creates a pause between feeling and reaction, allowing logic to intervene and evaluate. Emotional intelligence is not the suppression of feeling, but the discipline of understanding it. To master emotion is to turn it from a storm into a current, powerful but directed. Logic gives that current purpose, ensuring that emotion flows toward growth rather than destruction. Similarly, logic without compassion can become dangerous. History is full of examples where intellect divorced from empathy led to cruelty disguised as efficiency. A purely logical decision may succeed on paper but fail in humanity. True reasoning requires not only correctness but conscience. When logic and emotion coexist in balance, the result is wisdom, a form of intelligence that both understands truth and honors life. The thinker who cultivates both is capable of seeing the world through both clarity and care, calculation and compassion. Consider decision-making. When guided only by logic, one may choose what is profitable. When guided only by emotion, one may choose what feels good. But when guided by both, one chooses what is right, decisions that are not only effective but ethical. The integration of logic and emotion also refines communication. Emotion connects, logic convinces. Together, they persuade. A speaker who appeals to reason but lacks feeling sounds distant. A speaker who appeals to emotion but lacks logic sounds unstable. The balance of both inspires trust, for it reflects authenticity, a harmony of head and heart. Achieving this equilibrium requires daily mindfulness. Begin by observing your reactions in moments of tension. Do you overthink and detach, or do you overfeel and react? The goal is not to eliminate either tendency, but to bring awareness to both, inviting them into conversation rather than conflict. When emotion rises, logic asks for evidence. When logic overanalyzes, emotion reminds it of meaning. Over time, this dialogue within becomes natural, and decisions begin to emerge from calm clarity rather than inner chaos. This harmony is also crucial in relationships, for connection thrives on empathy yet survives on understanding. When two people argue, emotion fuels expression while logic seeks resolution. If either is missing, communication collapses. Too much emotion leads to pain, too much logic to coldness. The thinker who masters both can remain calm even in disagreement, feeling deeply yet speaking wisely, allowing emotion to express but letting logic decide when and how. Such a person radiates presence, the rare quality of being both understanding and understood. On a larger scale, societies too must learn this balance. A culture governed only by reason loses compassion. One ruled only by emotion loses direction. Progress demands both, the heart to care and the mind to plan. The individual, being a reflection of society, carries the same responsibility within themselves. Each thought, word, and choice becomes an act of balancing logic and emotion, reason and empathy. To live with this balance is to become centered. A person whose mind is sharp but heart is open, whose reasoning is grounded in feeling, and whose feeling is guided by understanding. Balance also nurtures peace. When logic and emotion are aligned, there is no inner war. Decisions flow naturally, actions feel right, and life moves with purpose. You stop swinging between regret and impulse, because each choice arises from integrated awareness. This is the calm power of the balanced thinker, clear, confident, and compassionate. It is easy to mistake emotional control for numbness or logical thinking for coldness, but in truth, mastery lies not in choosing one over the other, but in allowing both to coexist in harmony. The thinker's mind becomes a bridge, logic providing structure, emotion providing spirit. Together, they transform chaos into order and impulse into insight. In the mastery of critical thought, logic gives direction, emotion gives depth, and their union gives life its meaning. So remember, to think well is to feel wisely, and to feel well is to think wisely. The one who unites heart and mind does not simply think. They understand. Chapter 5. The human mind is the most complex structure in existence, and understanding its architecture is the foundation of mastering critical thinking. Every thought, every belief, every decision you make is built upon unseen layers: perception, memory, emotion, experience, and interpretation, all working together to construct your internal reality. To grasp the architecture of thought is to peer into the blueprint of your consciousness, to see how every piece of your mental world is formed and how it can be rebuilt for clarity and purpose. The mind is not a single entity. It is a vast network of systems interacting continuously, each influencing the other. At its base lies perception, the raw data of existence gathered through the senses. Yet perception is not truth itself. It is filtered, selected, and shaped by attention. Two people can look at the same event and perceive two entirely different realities, because perception is not passive, it is a creative act. The brain does not record reality like a camera. It paints it like an artist, using emotion as color and memory as brushstroke. Above perception lies interpretation, the meaning you assign to what you perceive. This meaning is not universal but personal, shaped by your beliefs, expectations, and past experiences. For instance, when someone looks at you with silence, one mind might interpret rejection, another might sense respect, and another might see indifference. The event is the same, but the architecture of thought determines the experience. Beyond interpretation rests belief, the framework that holds your understanding together. Beliefs are the beams and pillars of the mind structure, the invisible assumptions that support every conclusion you draw. Many of these beliefs were not consciously chosen, they were inherited, absorbed, and repeated until they became mental truths. But beliefs are not fixed structures, they can be remodeled, re-examined, and replaced when they no longer serve your growth. Above belief sits reasoning, the process by which you connect ideas and draw conclusions. Reasoning is the engineer of the mind, building pathways between facts and interpretations. Yet even reasoning depends on the foundation beneath it. Flawed beliefs produce flawed logic, just as a weak foundation cracks the strongest building. True critical thinking, therefore, begins with self-awareness, inspecting the base of your mental architecture, identifying where your perceptions are biased, your beliefs outdated, or your logic inconsistent. Every thought has a lineage. It comes from somewhere, carries something, and leads somewhere else. To understand your thinking, you must trace it back to its source. Ask yourself, where did this idea come from? What evidence supports it? What feeling sustains it? And what purpose does it serve? Through such inquiry, the blueprint of your mind becomes visible, and you begin to see that thought is not random but constructed. Just as an architect must understand structure to design safely, you must understand thought to reason wisely. The architecture of thought also reveals the role of memory, the archive of experience that the mind constantly draws from. Memory gives shape to identity, but it is also selective and emotional. The mind tends to remember what carries emotional weight and forgets what doesn't, thus bending perception to fit emotional patterns. A single painful memory can distort countless future experiences if left unexamined. This is why awareness must extend into the past, to revisit, reinterpret, and release the experiences that built unhelpful mental structures. When you become conscious of how memory interacts with belief, you can reconstruct the way you think, freeing yourself from the ghosts of the past. The architecture of thought is dynamic. It evolves as you grow. Every new insight is a renovation of the mind, replacing walls of assumption with windows of understanding. But renovation requires effort, the courage to question your own mental design, the humility to admit when it's flawed, and the patience to rebuild it one insight at a time. Many people decorate the surface of their thinking with borrowed ideas, but few rebuild its foundation. Yet only those who rebuild from within achieve true clarity. Understanding this architecture also reveals how thoughts become emotions and emotions, in turn, reinforce thoughts. This cycle, if left unchecked, can trap a person in repetitive loops, fear creating fearful thoughts which then amplify fear. To break such cycles, you must see thought not as who you are, but as what your mind produces. The observer, the conscious self, must step outside the structure to see its design. This separation between awareness and thought is what allows transformation. The moment you realize that you are not the building but the builder, the entire architecture of your mind becomes flexible. You gain the power to reconstruct your mental patterns with intention, replacing walls of limitation with doors of possibility. The architecture of thought is also influenced by environment, the conversations you engage in, the media you consume, the company you keep. These external forces act as architects too, constantly reshaping your mental blueprint. Critical thinking, therefore, requires protecting your mental environment, choosing your influences with care, and ensuring that the builders of your mind, experience, emotion, belief, and information are guided by awareness rather than accident. To understand your thought structure is to understand your life, for everything you experience externally is filtered through the architecture of your inner world. A cluttered mind builds confusion, a structured mind builds wisdom, but structure alone is not enough. Flexibility must be built into the design, allowing the mind to expand as new truths emerge. The greatest thinkers are not those who have perfect structures, but those who continually refine them. Every insight adds a new floor of understanding. Every reflection strengthens the foundation. As you grow more aware of this architecture, you begin to think deliberately, no longer reacting but designing your thoughts with care. You learn to detect cracks, cognitive distortions, emotional overreactions, false assumptions, and repair them through logic, evidence, and empathy. The result is mental stability, not rigidity, strength without stubbornness. Ultimately, the architecture of thought mirrors the architecture of life. The way you build your inner world determines how you experience the outer one. A mind designed with awareness perceives opportunities where others see obstacles, clarity where others see confusion. To master thinking, then, is to become your own architect, to study your mental structures, to refine them with honesty, and to design them with purpose. For thought shapes perception, perception shapes belief, belief shapes action, and action shapes destiny. The quality of your life will always reflect the quality of your thinking. So, as you continue this journey, remember, the architecture of your mind is not fixed. It is a masterpiece under construction, and you are both the designer and the builder of the world you see. Chapter 6. In the realm of critical thinking, one of the most powerful yet underestimated elements of human reasoning is the influence of cognitive biases. These hidden distortions in thought are like invisible filters that color every perception, interpretation, and decision we make, often without our awareness. They are mental shortcuts, known as heuristics, that evolved to help us make quick judgments in complex or uncertain situations, yet in the modern world, they often lead us astray. To master critical thinking, one must first learn to identify, understand, and overcome these biases that quietly shape the architecture of belief and perception. Cognitive biases are not flaws in intelligence, they are habits of the mind. They emerge from the brain's desire for efficiency, its preference for simplicity over complexity, and its tendency to favor comfort over truth. Every individual carries these biases, no matter how educated or rational they may seem, because they are woven into the very fabric of human cognition. The challenge lies not in eradicating them, but in recognizing their influence and developing the self-awareness to counteract them when they appear. Among the most common and powerful of these distortions is confirmation bias, the tendency to seek, interpret, and remember information that confirms our existing beliefs, while ignoring or dismissing evidence that contradicts them. This bias is the reason why debates rarely change minds, and why people often live inside echo chambers that reinforce what they already think. The mind loves consistency. It finds safety in familiarity, and thus it naturally resists anything that threatens its current understanding. Overcoming confirmation bias requires humility, the willingness to question not only others' opinions, but also your own, to say, I may be wrong, and that's okay if it leads me closer to truth. Another common bias is the availability heuristic, where the mind judges the likelihood of events based on how easily examples come to mind. This is why people fear airplane crashes more than car accidents, even though statistically, driving is far more dangerous. The mind equates vividness with frequency and drama with danger. Understanding this bias helps the thinker separate emotional reaction from factual analysis. Then there is the anchoring bias, where the first piece of information we receive becomes the anchor around which all subsequent judgments are made. A salesperson who first shows an expensive product makes the next one seem more affordable, not because its price changed, but because the mind's reference point was shifted. Similarly, in everyday life, the first impression or initial assumption often becomes the anchor for how we interpret future evidence. Critical thinkers learn to reset their anchors, to ask, what if my starting point is wrong, before reaching conclusions. The Dunning-Kruger effect exposes another deep bias, the tendency for people with limited knowledge to overestimate their competence and for experts to underestimate theirs. This bias stems from a lack of metacognition, the ability to assess one's own understanding. Those who know little often do not know how little they know, while those who know more are aware of the vastness of what they don't. Recognizing this paradox is essential for intellectual growth. It encourages the balance between confidence and curiosity, the ability to hold opinions lightly and remain open to learning. Another distortion, the halo effect, occurs when one positive quality of a person or idea creates an overall favorable impression, blinding us to its flaws. This bias explains why charisma can overshadow substance, or why we excuse faults in those we admire. The critical thinker learns to separate qualities, to judge ideas and people not as wholes but as parts, evaluating each aspect independently. Similarly, the negativity bias reveals our evolutionary predisposition to notice and remember negative experiences more than positive ones. This tendency once helped humans survive by making danger memorable, but in modern life it often fuels anxiety, pessimism, and distorted thinking. Overcoming it requires deliberate gratitude and balanced reflection to see the whole truth, not just its darker side. Then there is groupthink, the bias of conformity, where individuals suppress their independent judgment to align with the group. It is a silent killer of creativity and progress. The desire to belong, to avoid conflict, or to please authority can lead intelligent minds to make irrational decisions collectively. History is filled with tragedies born from groupthink, when no one dared to question the consensus. The antidote is intellectual courage, the strength to speak the unpopular truth, even in the face of disapproval. The self-serving bias is another common distortion, leading us to attribute success to our skill and failure to external circumstances. This protects our ego but blinds us to self-improvement. Critical thinkers practice self-honesty, acknowledging both personal responsibility in failure and the role of fortune in success. The goal is not self-blame but self-awareness. There is also the sunk cost fallacy, the tendency to continue a course of action because of time, effort, or resources already invested even when logic says to stop. People stay in toxic relationships, unfulfilling jobs, or failing projects because they feel compelled to justify past decisions. The critical thinker understands that past costs are gone. The only rational question is whether continuing brings future value. Letting go requires courage, but it is the essence of wise thinking. The illusion of control bias makes us believe we have more influence over events than we truly do, while the hindsight bias makes us believe outcomes were predictable after they occur, distorting our ability to learn from experience. Together, these biases trap us in cycles of overconfidence and regret. True mastery of thought lies in acknowledging uncertainty, accepting that control is partial and prediction imperfect. The more one understands these biases, the more one realizes that the mind's greatest limitation is not ignorance, but illusion, the illusion of knowing, the illusion of certainty, the illusion of objectivity. The critical thinker's journey is thus an ongoing act of self-examination, a constant peeling away of these illusions to reveal clearer insight. Awareness is the first step, but vigilance is the key. Each day, the mind must be watched gently like a flowing river, observed without judgment, redirected with wisdom. For cognitive biases cannot be destroyed, only managed through consciousness. The moment you believe you are immune to them, they gain power once more. Therefore, humility is the shield of reason, reflection its weapon, and awareness its light. To understand cognitive biases is to reclaim your mental freedom, to think not as your mind's programming dictates, but as your consciousness chooses. In mastering your biases, you begin to master your mind, and in mastering your mind, you begin to master your life. CFTR 7 Emotional intelligence and critical thinking are often seen as separate worlds, one belonging to the heart, the other to the mind, but true mastery of thought arises only when these two dimensions work in harmony. Emotions are not the enemies of logic, they are the raw data of human experience, signals that carry meaning about our needs, values, and environment. However, when left unexamined, emotions can distort reasoning, cloud judgment, and lead to impulsive or biased decisions. Conversely, when understood and managed consciously, emotions become powerful allies, adding depth, empathy, and moral awareness to our thinking. The bridge between reason and feeling is what defines emotional intelligence, the ability to recognize, understand, and regulate emotions in ourselves and others. Without this bridge, critical thinking becomes cold, detached, and incomplete. With it, thinking becomes human, wise, and transformative. To understand the relationship between emotional intelligence and critical thinking, one must first grasp that emotion precedes thought in the brain's architecture. Neuroscience reveals that stimuli reach the limbic system, the emotional center, before the rational prefrontal cortex processes them. This means we feel before we think, and our initial reactions are shaped by emotion long before logic intervenes. This is why people often say or do things they later regret. Their emotional response overrides their reasoning. Critical thinkers with high emotional intelligence recognize this sequence and learn to pause, to create space between stimulus and response. In that space lies awareness, and in awareness lies choice. The ability to delay reaction, to breathe before responding, is not weakness but strength, the mark of a mind that governs itself. Emotional intelligence begins with self-awareness, the foundation upon which all higher reasoning is built. It is the skill of noticing what you feel in real time, labeling it accurately, and tracing its cause. Instead of being swept away by anger, fear, or anxiety, the emotionally intelligent thinker asks, "What is this feeling telling me?" This question transforms emotion from a force that controls you into a signal that guides you. For example, anger may point to a boundary being crossed, while fear may indicate uncertainty or lack of information. Rather than suppressing or indulging these emotions, critical thinkers interpret them as data to be analyzed, integrating emotional truth with rational insight. The next layer is self-regulation, the ability to manage emotional impulses in alignment with values and reason. Emotional regulation does not mean suppression, it means redirection. It is the difference between reacting and responding. A person who reacts is a slave to emotion. A person who responds uses emotion as energy for constructive action. Self-regulation allows you to remain calm in conflict, objective in decision-making, and resilient under pressure. It keeps the mind clear and balanced, preventing emotions from hijacking logic. Then comes motivation, the emotional drive behind persistence and focus. While logic provides the direction, emotion provides the fuel. Every great thinker, creator, or leader is driven not just by reason but by passion, a deep emotional connection to their purpose. Emotional intelligence helps align this passion with rational goals so that enthusiasm does not turn into obsession, and ambition does not become recklessness. By channeling emotion toward meaningful objectives, one achieves both clarity of thought and depth of purpose. The next dimension is empathy, the ability to understand the emotions of others, to see through their perspective, and to feel what they feel without losing one's own balance. Empathy expands critical thinking by adding the dimension of context. It reminds us that truth is not abstract but human, that behind every argument or belief lies emotion, history, and experience. An empathetic thinker listens not just to words but to emotions beneath them. This awareness prevents judgmental thinking and fosters open-mindedness, allowing dialogue to replace debate and understanding to replace division. Empathy transforms logic into wisdom, because wisdom is truth applied with compassion. The final pillar of emotional intelligence is social awareness and relationship management, the ability to navigate human interactions with emotional insight. In critical thinking, this translates into the ability to persuade, collaborate, and resolve conflict constructively. When one understands the emotional dynamics of others, one can communicate ideas with clarity and sensitivity. Rational arguments may convince the mind, but emotional intelligence touches the heart, and when both are engaged, transformation occurs. A person who can think clearly and feel deeply wields the full power of the human mind. Yet, integrating emotional intelligence with critical thinking requires continual practice. The first challenge is to separate emotion from interpretation. When something triggers you, anger, fear, shame, the mind rushes to justify the feeling with thoughts. The emotionally intelligent thinker pauses and asks, "Is this thought true, or is it a reflection of how I feel?" This self-questioning prevents emotional reasoning, where feelings become false evidence. Another challenge is managing emotional bias, the tendency to favor information that aligns with our emotional state. For example, when angry, we interpret neutral actions as hostile. When hopeful, we see signs of success everywhere. Recognizing this bias allows us to ground our judgments in evidence rather than emotion. Emotionally intelligent critical thinkers also practice emotional detachment, not by becoming cold or indifferent, but by observing emotions without merging with them. They view feelings as passing waves on the surface of consciousness, while the deeper self remains still. From this state, one can make decisions guided by both intellect and integrity. Furthermore, emotional intelligence enhances moral reasoning. Many ethical decisions are not about logic alone, but about emotional sensitivity, the capacity to feel the weight of one's choices on others. Empathy tempers judgment with humanity, reminding us that critical thinking is not just about being right, but about being kind. The most advanced form of thought is not purely analytical, it is compassionate and wise. In the absence of emotional intelligence, intelligence becomes manipulation, but when infused with emotional awareness, it becomes moral strength. Ultimately, the integration of emotional intelligence and critical thinking leads to inner coherence, a harmony between what we think, feel, and do. This coherence breeds authenticity, making a person trustworthy, balanced, and clear-minded. Such a person can navigate conflict without hostility, lead without arrogance, and learn without defensiveness. They understand that emotions are not to be feared, but to be understood. That reason is not to dominate emotion, but to guide it, and that true wisdom lies in the union of the two. When logic is the compass and emotion the wind, the mind becomes a vessel of insight and compassion, capable of steering through life's complexities with both clarity and grace. The emotionally intelligent critical thinker does not seek to silence the heart, but to educate it, to teach emotion the language of reason, and to teach reason the music of feeling. In mastering this balance, one achieves the rarest form of mastery, a mind that thinks deeply and a heart that feels wisely, working together in the service of truth, growth, and inner peace. Shia Chaptiare, the power of perspective is the unseen force that shapes every human experience, for reality is not what happens to us, it is what we perceive happens to us. Two people may walk through the same storm, yet one sees disaster while the other sees renewal, one curses the rain, and the other sees nourishment for growth. Perspective is the lens of the mind, the frame through which we interpret the world, and its influence is absolute. Critical thinking, at its core, is not merely the art of analyzing facts, but the discipline of managing perspective, learning to step outside the narrow window of personal experience and see the broader landscape of truth. Every thought, judgment, and emotion we experience is filtered through perspective, which is built from memory, belief, and expectation. When we say, "I understand," what we truly mean is, "I understand from where I stand." This awareness is the first awakening of intellectual maturity, the realization that our view of reality is not reality itself, but one interpretation among countless others. To master perspective is to master freedom, for when you can shift how you see, you can transform what you experience. Most people live as prisoners of their perspective, convinced that their viewpoint is the only truth. They defend their beliefs not because they are right, but because their identity depends on them. Critical thinkers, however, develop the humility to step back and ask, "What am I not seeing? What would this look like from another angle?" This simple act of mental repositioning dissolves arrogance and opens the door to understanding. It is through perspective that empathy is born, that wisdom deepens, and that conflict transforms into dialogue. Perspective shapes not only how we see the world, but also how we see ourselves. The way we interpret our past, our challenges, and our successes determines our emotional reality. Two people can face the same setback. One calls it failure, the other calls it feedback. The difference is not in the event, but in the lens through which it is viewed. This is why changing perspective can often change one's entire life story. The mind is like a camera. The scene does not change, but the focus does. When you adjust the lens, clarity emerges where once there was distortion. To master perspective, one must first learn detachment, not emotional coldness, but the ability to observe one's thoughts and reactions without merging with them. When you are inside an emotion, perspective narrows. When you observe it, perspective widens. Detachment allows you to see anger as a message, fear as a teacher, and pain as a process rather than a punishment. The ability to shift perspective during emotional turbulence is a hallmark of critical thinking maturity. It allows you to respond to life, not merely react to it. Perspective also governs perception of time. The mind often magnifies present discomfort because it forgets the larger narrative. What feels unbearable today may later be seen as necessary preparation for strength. Thus, widening one's temporal perspective, seeing life as a continuum rather than a collection of isolated moments, transforms suffering into meaning. Every hardship becomes a lesson when viewed from the altitude of hindsight. The great thinkers, leaders, and creators of history share one trait in common: the ability to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously. They could see both sides of an argument, understand the motives of friend and foe alike, and recognize the interplay of emotion and logic. This capacity for perspective multiplicity is what allows complexity to be understood and contradictions to be reconciled. It is what enables progress. Without it, thinking becomes rigid, tribal, and defensive. The critical thinker must therefore cultivate the discipline of mental flexibility, the willingness to consider that opposing views may contain fragments of truth, and that synthesis, not division, leads to higher understanding. But perspective is not only external, it is internal as well. It governs the way we interpret our own thoughts. Self-reflection without perspective can become self-criticism, while perspective turns self-reflection into growth. When you view your mistakes through the lens of compassion rather than judgment, learning replaces shame. When you view your achievements with gratitude instead of pride, humility replaces arrogance. Perspective is thus the silent architect of character. It shapes how we relate to ourselves, and in turn, how we relate to others. It is also the foundation of resilience. When adversity strikes, those who suffer most are not necessarily those who face the hardest challenges, but those whose perspective makes the challenge seem unbearable. A resilient mind reinterprets struggle as training, not torment. It says, "This is not happening to me, it is happening for me." That subtle shift transforms despair into determination and weakness into wisdom. Perspective is the alchemy of the mind. It can turn pain into purpose, fear into courage, and endings into beginnings. The challenge is not to escape difficulty, but to elevate your viewpoint until meaning becomes visible. In mastering perspective, one must also understand its distortions. Biases, emotions, and cultural conditioning all shape how we see. The mind filters reality to protect the ego, reinforcing what it wants to believe and rejecting what it cannot bear. This is why self-awareness is inseparable from perspective management. You cannot change what you do not first observe. The practice of mindfulness, watching thoughts as they arise, noticing the emotions that color them, helps you catch perspective in motion. You begin to see how anger narrows your world, how fear distorts proportion, and how gratitude expands your field of vision. Awareness becomes the lens cleaner of the mind, restoring clarity. Yet perspective alone is not enough. Wisdom lies in choosing the right perspective at the right time. There are moments when logic must take precedence over empathy, and others when compassion must outweigh analysis. A balanced thinker knows when to step close to feel and when to step back to see. This dynamic balance is the essence of mature thinking, the ability to adapt your viewpoint to the demands of truth, not the comfort of ego. Perspective is also the foundation of creativity. Every innovation, every artistic breakthrough, every leap in understanding has come from someone who dared to see differently. To think critically is to ask, what if I am looking at this the wrong way? And to have the courage to experiment with new angles. The most profound discoveries in science, art, and philosophy are born not from new facts, but from new perspectives on old ones. The universe has always been what it is, only human vision evolves. In daily life, perspective is what turns ordinary moments into sources of gratitude. When you shift your focus from what is missing to what is present, from what went wrong to what was learned, from what you lost to what you gained, peace replaces frustration. Perspective is not denial of difficulty. It is the choice to view it through the lens of possibility. It reminds you that every situation carries more than one meaning, and that you always have the power to choose which meaning to live by. In the grand design of personal improvement, perspective is the architect of peace and the engineer of wisdom. When your thinking becomes flexible, your emotions become stable, and your actions become purposeful. To master perspective is to see not only with the eyes but with the mind, to understand that reality expands or contracts according to the depth of your awareness. And when you finally realize that you can change your world by changing the way you see it, you hold in your hands the most powerful tool of all, the ability to shape your own reality through the conscious art of perspective. Shichapati 9 decision-making is the ultimate expression of thought, the bridge where intellect transforms into action, and where the quality of our reasoning becomes visible in the outcomes of our lives. Every choice, whether large or small, reflects the state of our mind, our clarity, our courage, and our ability to balance logic with intuition. The art of decision-making is not merely about choosing between options, it is about understanding how we choose, why we choose, and what influences the choices we make. Most people believe decisions are made consciously, yet neuroscience reveals that many of them are shaped unconsciously by emotions, habits, biases, and hidden beliefs. The true critical thinker learns to slow this process down, to bring the unconscious into awareness, to expose the invisible influences at play, and to make choices that are deliberate rather than automatic. Every decision begins with perception. The way we define a problem determines the quality of the solution we find. A narrow perception leads to limited options, while a broader view reveals creative possibilities. Critical thinkers, therefore, begin decision-making with clarity of definition. What is the real question? What are the facts versus assumptions? What emotions are coloring my view? This step alone separates impulsive decisions from intelligent ones. They also understand that indecision is itself a decision, a passive choice to surrender control to circumstance. Thus, they cultivate the courage to act even in uncertainty, guided not by the illusion of perfect knowledge, but by rational confidence and emotional steadiness. In the architecture of decision-making, there are several layers of influence: logic, emotion, intuition, and value. Logic provides structure, it examines evidence, compares alternatives, and projects consequences. It is the engineer of choice. Emotion adds motivation. It reveals what truly matters to us and helps prioritize meaning over mere efficiency. Intuition, often misunderstood as irrational, is actually the distilled wisdom of experience, a subconscious pattern recognition system that synthesizes countless observations the conscious mind overlooks. Values serve as the compass, ensuring that choices align with integrity and long-term purpose rather than short-term gain. The master thinker weaves all four together, balancing them so that no single one dominates unfairly. A purely logical decision may be efficient but hollow, while an overly emotional one may be passionate but reckless. Integration of mind and heart is what gives a decision both strength and soul. Yet, to reach this integration, one must confront the biases that silently distort judgment. Confirmation bias, loss aversion, and overconfidence are the invisible strings that pull at human decision-making. The critical thinker constantly asks, "Am I seeing this clearly, or only as I wish to see it?" They welcome opposing viewpoints, not as threats but as mirrors reflecting unseen angles. They gather diverse perspectives, seek evidence that challenges their assumptions, and remain humble enough to admit uncertainty. This intellectual humility is not weakness. It is the strength that keeps the mind flexible, ensuring that choices evolve with new information rather than being chained to outdated beliefs. One of the most common traps in decision making is the illusion of certainty. Humans crave predictability. We seek guarantees in a world that offers none. This desire for control leads to hesitation, procrastination, or clinging to false security. But true wisdom lies in embracing uncertainty, not as chaos, but as the natural texture of reality. Critical thinkers learn to make informed choices even when outcomes are unclear. They calculate risks, prepare contingencies, and accept that no decision eliminates uncertainty, it only navigates it. The goal, therefore, is not to remove risk but to manage it through awareness. Another danger is analysis paralysis, the overthinking that results from fear of error. In pursuit of the perfect choice, many make none at all, allowing opportunities to pass. Critical thinkers understand that no decision can guarantee perfection, only learning. They adopt the mindset of experimentation, seeing each choice as feedback. Success teaches direction, failure teaches correction, and both lead to growth. This perspective transforms decision, making from a burden into an art form, a continuous refinement of judgment through experience. Time management plays a crucial role as well. Decisions delayed indefinitely lose power. Thus, the thinker sets rational limits on deliberation, distinguishing between decisions that require deep analysis and those that only need quick resolution. This prioritization prevents mental exhaustion and ensures momentum in action. The emotional dimension of decision-making cannot be ignored. Fear of lost judgment or regret often paralyzes choice. The antidote is awareness and courage. Awareness of the fear's source and courage to act despite it. The critical thinker reframes fear as information. It signals where value lies and where growth awaits. Every significant decision will provoke discomfort, for growth always demands leaving the familiar. The question is not, do I feel fear? But is this fear protecting me or limiting me? Such reflection turns anxiety into guidance. Another element in wise decision-making is contextual awareness, understanding the broader system in which a choice exists. A decision that seems beneficial in isolation may be destructive in the long term or in a larger context. For example, a business decision that maximizes short-term profit at the expense of integrity erodes trust and future stability. Thus, every decision must be viewed through multiple lenses: immediate outcome, long-term consequence, ethical alignment, and emotional impact. The synthesis of these lenses forms what philosophers call a prudence, practical wisdom in action. Moreover, decision-making is deeply influenced by emotional states. A tired, stressed, or distracted mind cannot judge clearly. This is why critical thinkers prioritize mental clarity before major choices. They know that rest, reflection, and distance often bring better answers than frantic analysis. A clear mind perceives patterns invisible to the restless one. This discipline of mental composure is what separates reaction from reasoning. The process of evaluating alternatives also requires discernment between those options and distractions. Not every available path deserves attention. The wise thinker narrows choices based on alignment with values and purpose, asking, does this choice serve my growth, my integrity, and my peace of mind? By filtering decisions through these criteria, one avoids being overwhelmed by noise. Finally, once a decision is made, commitment becomes the next test of mastery. Doubt is natural, but constant second-guessing drains energy and undermines confidence. A decision well considered deserves full commitment until evidence demands re-evaluation. This does not mean stubbornness, it means focus. The mind that hesitates after deciding is like a traveler who walks 2 steps forward and 1 back, never arriving. Commitment generates momentum, and momentum creates clarity through experience. Ultimately, decision-making is both science and art, the science of logic, evidence, and probability, and the art of timing, intuition, and courage. It is the moment where self-awareness meets responsibility, where thought becomes destiny. Each decision is a brushstroke on the canvas of life, shaping the picture of who we become. Some strokes are bold, others hesitant, but all contribute to the masterpiece of experience. To master decision-making is to master self-trust, to know that even imperfect choices can lead to perfect lessons. The critical thinker does not seek the illusion of never being wrong, but the wisdom of learning from every outcome. For in the end, it is not the decisions themselves that define a person, but the awareness, integrity, and growth with which those decisions are made. Sharp 10 Emotional intelligence stands as one of the most vital dimensions of critical thinking mastery, for it governs not only how we perceive and regulate our own emotions, but also how we interpret, respond to, and influence the emotions of others. Where logic and reason form the structure of thought, emotional intelligence provides its depth and humanity. To think critically without emotional awareness is to navigate with one eye closed. To feel deeply without critical discipline is to drift wherever emotion blows. The harmony between intellect and emotion defines true mastery of the mind. Emotional intelligence, often abbreviated as EQ, is not about suppressing feelings or pretending calmness. It is about understanding emotions, our own and others, so deeply that they no longer control us unconsciously. It is the art of using emotion as data, interpreting it to inform better decisions, relationships, and self-management. Every emotion carries information. Anger signals boundary violation, fear warns of potential danger, sadness calls for reflection or healing, joy encourages engagement, and love inspires connection. The critical thinker learns to listen to these signals without being enslaved by them. This is the difference between reacting and responding, between being impulsively driven and consciously guided. The emotionally intelligent thinker observes emotion with curiosity rather than judgment, asking, "What is this feeling trying to tell me?" instead of, "How can I get rid of it?" This awareness transforms emotional turbulence into wisdom. In the landscape of emotional intelligence, self-awareness forms the foundation. Without self-awareness, one cannot regulate thought or behavior effectively, for the mind becomes hostage to hidden emotional undercurrents. The first step, therefore, is to notice emotional triggers, moments when anger, insecurity, jealousy, or pride rise uninvited. Instead of denying these feelings, the critical thinker examines them like a scientist studying a specimen. What belief lies beneath this reaction? What fear is being touched? This reflective pause creates the space between stimulus and response, a sacred space where freedom begins. The great psychologist Viktor Frankl wrote that within this space lies our power to choose, and it is through emotional intelligence that this space expands. Once aware, the thinker can engage in emotional regulation, not by repression, but by transformation. Deep breathing, reframing thoughts, mindfulness, and perspective-taking become tools for rebalancing the inner state. Emotional regulation is not the absence of feeling, it is the mastery of it. It means feeling anger but choosing to act with calmness, feeling fear but proceeding with courage, feeling sadness but finding meaning within it. In this way, emotional intelligence strengthens critical thinking, ensuring that emotion enriches logic rather than distorts it. Beyond the self lies the domain of empathy, the ability to sense, understand, and resonate with the emotions of others. Empathy is not simply feeling what another feels, it is perceiving the world through their lens, while maintaining the clarity of your own. It requires both sensitivity and boundaries. A critical thinker with empathy does not absorb others' emotions like a sponge, but reflects them like a mirror, helping others see themselves more clearly. This emotional attunement fosters communication, cooperation, and trust, all essential for human connection. In conversation, empathy means listening not merely to words but to tone, pauses, and subtext. It is hearing the emotion behind the language. Such awareness allows the thinker to respond in ways that acknowledge others' realities, reducing conflict and enhancing understanding. Empathy also combats one of the greatest enemies of critical thought, ego. When one learns to see through others' perspectives, personal biases soften, and the mind becomes more flexible, open to alternate interpretations. Thus, emotional intelligence becomes not only a tool for compassion, but also for intellectual humility. Another vital component is social awareness, the ability to read emotional currents in groups, organizations, and societies. Every environment has its emotional climate, often unspoken but powerful. The emotionally intelligent thinker senses these dynamics, noticing tension before it erupts or enthusiasm before it spreads. In leadership, this awareness is invaluable. Great leaders are not those who impose emotion, but those who channel it wisely, turning collective fear into courage and collective anger into purposeful change. They understand that human motivation is emotional at its core, and they shape communication to inspire rather than manipulate. Emotional intelligence, in this sense, is ethical power, the ability to influence without coercion, to lead through understanding rather than dominance. Self-motivation, another pillar of emotional intelligence, bridges emotion and purpose. It is the capacity to harness feelings like passion, curiosity, and optimism to fuel sustained effort toward meaningful goals. The critical thinker knows that reasoning alone cannot drive action. Emotion must ignite it, but instead of relying on fleeting excitement, they cultivate deeper emotional states, discipline, resilience, and gratitude. They recognize that failure is not an emotional verdict, but an opportunity for learning, that frustration is not defeat, but feedback. By aligning emotion with purpose, they create inner momentum that persists even when logic alone would surrender. Emotional intelligence transforms obstacles into motivation, pain into progress. A crucial aspect of emotional intelligence is emotional honesty, the courage to face one's true feelings without denial or projection. Many people hide behind rationalizations, pretending indifference when hurt or superiority when insecure. But the critical thinker sees that emotional denial weakens reasoning. What is repressed in the heart returns disguised in thought. Honesty brings coherence between thinking and feeling, allowing authenticity to flourish. Authenticity, in turn, builds trust, both within oneself and with others. When thoughts, emotions, and actions align, energy is no longer wasted in inner conflict. The mind becomes clear, decisions become cleaner, and relationships become deeper. The integration of emotional intelligence into critical thinking also guards against cognitive distortions. Biases such as emotional reasoning, "I feel it, therefore it's true," or catastrophizings, "this one failure means everything is ruined," lose their power when emotions are recognized as transient, not absolute truths. Emotional intelligence allows one to validate the feeling without believing the false narrative it carries. The emotionally mature thinker can say, "I feel this intensely," but intensity does not equal accuracy. This separation of emotion from fact is what preserves objectivity in thought while maintaining empathy in behavior. In the realm of personal growth, emotional intelligence becomes a compass for inner harmony. The thinker who understands emotions navigates life not as a battlefield of impulses, but as a symphony of signals guiding evolution. They do not seek to eliminate negative emotions, but to interpret them. Anger becomes a call for justice, sadness a reminder of love, fear a teacher of caution, and joy a celebration of alignment. Each emotion plays a role in the ecosystem of growth. Suppression breeds confusion. Expression with awareness breeds wisdom. Thus, emotional intelligence transforms emotional chaos into emotional clarity, a state where one feels deeply yet remains steady, where passion coexists with peace. Ultimately, emotional intelligence is not separate from critical thinking. It is its emotional core. Without it, thinking becomes cold and detached. With it, thinking becomes compassionate and complete. The synthesis of EQ and IQ creates what may be called EV-wise intelligence, a form of understanding that values both truth and tenderness. In relationships, it leads to connection; in leadership, to inspiration; in personal life, to peace. The critical thinker realizes that mastery of thought is incomplete without mastery of emotion, because emotions shape perception, and perception shapes thought. Emotional intelligence is the silent force that turns insight into empathy, analysis into action, and knowledge into wisdom. It is the bridge between mind and heart, ensuring that our intelligence serves humanity rather than ego. And in this balance, one finds not only mental clarity but emotional freedom. The freedom to think clearly, feel deeply, and act wisely in a world that demands all three. Chapter 11. Creative thinking is the oxygen of critical thinking, the force that keeps it alive, evolving and adaptable in a constantly changing world. While critical thinking dissects, evaluates, and refines information, creative thinking imagines, connects, and generates possibilities beyond what already exists. Both are twin flames of the same intellectual fire. One demands precision, the other invites expansion. Together, they allow the mind to move freely between the structure of reason and the boundlessness of imagination. Creative thinking is not limited to art or invention. It is a mindset, a way of perceiving the world not as fixed but as fluid, filled with potential rather than limitation. To think creatively is to challenge assumptions, to look at ordinary things and ask extraordinary questions, to turn what is into what could be. It is the courage to question, the curiosity to explore, and the openness to fail and learn anew. Many people mistakenly believe creativity is a rare gift bestowed upon a select few, but in truth it is an inherent faculty of every human mind. It begins in childhood, thrives on curiosity, and withers only under the weight of conformity and fear. The task of critical thinkers is not to acquire creativity, but to reclaim it, to remove the mental barriers that block it from flowing freely. The foundation of creative thinking lies in curiosity. Curiosity is the hunger of the mind, the inner spark that drives exploration, invention, and discovery. Every breakthrough, from scientific theories to social reforms, began with a simple question: why or what if? The creative thinker nurtures this questioning habit. Instead of accepting information at face value, they probe deeper, asking not just what something is, but how it could be different or better. This questioning expands awareness, revealing hidden patterns and connections that others overlook. Yet curiosity alone is not enough. It must be combined with imagination, the faculty of forming mental images of things not yet seen. Imagination transforms facts into ideas, problems into possibilities, and limitations into invitations for growth. But imagination flourishes only in an environment free from fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, and fear of being wrong are the greatest enemies of creative thought. Critical thinkers understand that failure is not the opposite of creativity but its partner. Every creative act risks failure because it ventures into the unknown. The creative mind, therefore, must be courageous, not reckless, but willing to experiment, to be wrong, and to learn. Creative thinking thrives when the mind can balance freedom and focus. Too much structure stifles originality, while too much chaos disperses energy. The creative critical thinker knows when to loosen and when to tighten the reins of thought. They may brainstorm wildly to generate ideas, and then switch into analytical mode to refine and select the best ones. This alternation between divergent and convergent thinking, the expansion and contraction of ideas, is what turns creativity into innovation. Divergent thinking explores multiple possibilities, while convergent thinking evaluates which ideas are practical and valuable. Together, they transform raw imagination into meaningful creation. In this sense, creativity is not a random spark, but a disciplined dance between openness and judgment. Another essential element of creative thinking is pattern recognition, the ability to see relationships between seemingly unrelated concepts. The mind of a creative thinker connects dots others miss. They draw insight from diverse fields, science, philosophy, art, psychology, and fuse them into something new. This cross-pollination of ideas leads to innovation because creativity thrives at the intersections of disciplines. For instance, Leonardo da Vinci combined art and science, Steve Jobs merged technology and design, and great philosophers intertwined logic with imagination. The creative critical thinker seeks inspiration everywhere, knowing that originality is not about inventing from nothing, but about rearranging existing elements in a fresh and meaningful way. Observation plays a vital role in creativity. The creative mind observes reality deeply, noticing subtleties others ignore. They look at the same world as everyone else but see different things because they pay attention to the overlooked, the ordinary, and the mundane. They understand that inspiration often hides in plain sight, waiting to be noticed. This attentiveness is not passive, it is active engagement with the world, a dialogue between perception and interpretation. The creative thinker asks, what story does this moment hold, and what truth hides beneath this surface? Such questions awaken new perspectives and fuel innovation. Flexibility of thought is another hallmark of creativity. Rigid minds cling to fixed categories, while creative minds move fluidly between them. They tolerate ambiguity, uncertainty, and contradiction, recognizing that truth often lives in paradox. Where the conventional thinker seeks closure, the creative thinker remains open, exploring multiple interpretations before forming conclusions. This openness allows for serendipitous discovery, insights that arise unexpectedly when the mind wanders freely. The creative process often feels nonlinear because it follows the rhythm of intuition rather than the straight line of logic. The critical thinker understands and honors this process, giving space for ideas to gestate and evolve naturally. An often overlooked aspect of creative thinking is play. Play is the state of relaxed exploration without pressure of outcome, the mindset that allows imagination to flourish. In play, the mind feels safe to experiment, to make mistakes, and to try again. Adults often lose this ability because they equate play with frivolity, but great thinkers know that play is the birthplace of innovation. Einstein once said, "Creativity is intelligence having fun." This spirit of intellectual playfulness allows the thinker to approach problems with lightness, curiosity, and joy, transforming obstacles into puzzles rather than burdens. However, creativity must also be grounded in purpose. Creativity without direction becomes noise, but creativity aligned with meaning becomes progress. The critical thinker asks, to what end am I creating? Does this serve growth, truth, or beauty? When creativity serves a higher goal, whether improving human life, expressing truth, or solving problems, it becomes transformative. Purpose gives creativity structure, while creativity gives purpose soul. Together, they drive evolution, both personal and collective. Self-trust is also indispensable for creativity. Doubt is natural, but chronic self-doubt paralyzes invention. The creative mind must learn to trust its process, to give voice to its intuition even when others cannot yet see the vision. This self-trust grows from experience. The more one creates, the more one realizes that ideas need not be perfect to be valuable. Perfectionism, therefore, is the silent killer of creativity. The critical thinker transcends perfectionism by focusing on progress, viewing every creation as a step toward refinement. They understand that the first draft of any idea is meant to be imperfect. It is the raw material from which excellence emerges. Ultimately, creative thinking is an act of liberation, the liberation of the mind from conformity, the liberation of perception from limitation, and the liberation of possibility from fear. It teaches us that there is always another way to see, to think, and to be. Creative thinking expands the boundaries of reality by expanding the boundaries of thought itself. When combined with critical reasoning, it becomes a force of transformation capable of reshaping not just personal lives but entire societies. The creative critical thinker is both dreamer and builder, philosopher and practitioner, visionary and realist. They do not merely adapt to change, they create it. In mastering creative thinking, one learns to live dynamically, to see the invisible, and to bring forth what has never existed before. For creativity is not a luxury. It is the essence of human evolution, the force that turns thinking into innovation and imagination into reality. See Chapter 12. Problem solving is the practical application of critical thinking, the bridge between theory and reality where thought transforms into action and understanding is tested by challenge. Every problem, no matter how complex or intimidating, is an invitation for growth, a puzzle presented by life to strengthen the mind's resilience, adaptability, and creativity. To master problem solving is to master one's ability to navigate uncertainty, to transform confusion into clarity and obstacles into opportunities. A problem is not a sign of weakness but a signal of potential. It calls upon the thinker to apply logic, insight, and emotional stability in harmony, Critical thinkers understand that problems are inevitable, but suffering is optional. What matters is not the difficulty itself, but how one perceives and approaches it. The first step in effective problem solving is understanding the nature of the problem, for most failures in reasoning come from misidentifying what truly needs solving. A superficial thinker attacks symptoms, a critical thinker seeks causes. This requires slowing down to analyze the situation without panic, stripping away emotional exaggeration to reveal the core issue. Clarity begins when one stops asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and instead asks, "What is truly happening here?" Defining the problem accurately is half the solution, for a well-defined problem organizes thought and focuses energy where it matters most. Once the problem is clearly defined, the next step is observation and data gathering. The critical thinker approaches the issue as a detective would, collecting facts, identifying patterns, and separating evidence from assumption. They know that assumptions are mental shortcuts that often distort reality, so they ask, "What do I know for certain, and what do I believe without proof?" By distinguishing between these, the thinker builds a foundation of truth. They also recognize that perspective shapes perception, and therefore they deliberately adopt multiple viewpoints, asking how others might see the same problem differently. This multidimensional analysis not only broadens understanding but also prevents tunnel vision, a common cause of poor decisions. At this stage, emotional awareness is crucial. Emotions, if unacknowledged, can cloud reasoning. Fear may exaggerate threats, frustration may rush judgment, and pride may blind to alternatives. The emotionally intelligent thinker acknowledges these feelings without surrendering to them, maintaining calm focus even when pressure rises. Emotional regulation is not detachment, it is disciplined presence. The next stage of problem solving is ideation, the generation of possible solutions. Here, creativity merges with logic. Instead of jumping to the first available fix, the thinker explores a wide range of options, no matter how unconventional. Brainstorming freely, they invite imagination to roam beyond traditional limits. Every idea is treated as a potential seed, even if imperfect. Judgment is temporarily suspended during this phase, for premature criticism kills creativity. Only after generating a diverse set of ideas does the thinker return to analytical mode, evaluating each one for feasibility, impact, and alignment with values and goals. This blend of divergent and convergent thinking ensures that solutions are both innovative and realistic. A powerful technique at this stage is reframing, looking at the problem through a different lens. For instance, instead of asking, "How can I eliminate this obstacle?" one might ask, "How can this obstacle serve me?" Or, "What opportunity hides inside this difficulty?" Such reframing transforms limitation into inspiration and empowers the mind to find solutions others overlook. Critical problem solving also requires distinguishing between what can and cannot be controlled. Many thinkers waste precious energy fighting elements beyond their influence, which leads to frustration and paralysis. The wise problem solver practices what the Stoics called the discipline of control, focusing effort on internal mastery, thoughts, choices, actions rather than external outcomes. This shift in attention not only conserves energy, but also strengthens self-efficacy, the belief in one's ability to influence change. It is from this sense of agency that practical solutions emerge. Once possible strategies are identified, the thinker proceeds to experimentation, testing ideas through action. Theory without implementation is mere speculation. Action reveals reality. The critical thinker approaches action scientifically. They form hypotheses, apply them, observe results, and refine based on feedback. Failure in this context is not defeat but data. Each misstep provides information that sharpens future attempts. This experimental mindset transforms problem solving into an ongoing process of learning rather than a one-time event. A key skill in this process is adaptability. No solution, no matter how well designed, survives unchanged in the face of real-world complexity. The critical thinker remains flexible, willing to pivot when new information arises. They avoid the trap of attachment, clinging to a solution out of ego or fear of appearing inconsistent. Instead, they value truth over pride, progress over perfection. Adaptability also means knowing when to step back and reassess. Sometimes, the wisest move is not to push harder but to pause, gain distance, and allow perspective to refresh. The mind that can pause without panic possesses power. Collaboration often enhances problem-solving, for collective intelligence multiplies insight. The critical thinker values dialogue, knowing that others' perspectives may reveal blind spots. However, collaboration must be balanced with independent thought. Groupthink can be as dangerous as isolation. Effective collaboration requires openness, respect, and humility, the willingness to listen deeply and to question even popular opinions. Diversity of thought strengthens solutions because complex problems rarely have single, discipline answers. When different minds with varied experiences collaborate under shared purpose, innovation thrives. Ethical awareness is another essential dimension of critical problem solving. A solution that works technically but violates moral integrity is not a solution at all. It is a temporary victory with long-term consequences. The critical thinker evaluates not only what works, but what is right. They ask, does this solution align with my principles? Does it serve others fairly? Ethical reflection ensures that problem-solving contributes to both individual and collective well-being, preserving trust and conscience in the process. Integrity, after all, is the unseen framework that holds every successful solution upright. Resilience forms the emotional backbone of problem-solving. Challenges often persist longer than expected, and solutions may fail multiple times before success. The resilient thinker treats these moments not as setbacks, but as stages in refinement. They maintain patience and persistence, understanding that every problem solved strengthens the mental muscles for the next one. This mindset of perseverance transforms problem solving from a struggle into a practice of mastery. Even when external problems remain unsolved, the thinker's inner composure remains intact, a sign that they have solved the most important problem of all, the management of their own mind. Ultimately, problem solving is not just about fixing external issues but about cultivating internal order. Each time the mind solves a problem, it reorganizes itself, becoming sharper, calmer, and more efficient. The process mirrors life itself, an endless sequence of challenges demanding awareness, adaptability, and wisdom. The most powerful problem solvers are not those who know all the answers, but those who have learned how to think clearly amidst confusion, how to act decisively amidst uncertainty, and how to maintain integrity amidst pressure. They understand that every problem carries a lesson, every obstacle conceals a gift, and every solution is but a doorway to deeper understanding. In mastering problem solving, one becomes not merely efficient but enlightened, able to see that life's problems are not interruptions to growth, but the very instruments of it. Sector 13. Cognitive biases are the invisible architects of much of human error, shaping our thoughts, emotions, and decisions in ways we rarely notice. They are mental shortcuts, automatic patterns of thinking that evolved to help us process information quickly. But in the modern world, where complexity demands precision, these shortcuts often mislead us. To master critical thinking, one must first master awareness of these biases, for they are the silent saboteurs of rational judgment. Every human mind, no matter how intelligent or educated, is vulnerable to bias because biases are not signs of stupidity, they are signs of humanity. They arise from the brain's need for efficiency. Our ancestors faced survival-based decisions that required speed more than accuracy, and thus evolution favored instincts that simplified thinking. However, in the age of information where decisions shape careers, relationships, and societies, these simplifications can distort truth and produce flawed conclusions. Recognizing and neutralizing bias, therefore, is not merely an intellectual exercise, it is an act of liberation, freeing the mind from illusion and allowing it to perceive reality with greater clarity. One of the most pervasive biases is confirmation bias, the tendency to seek, interpret, and remember information that supports our existing beliefs while ignoring evidence that contradicts them. It makes the mind a self-reinforcing echo chamber where truth becomes secondary to comfort. The critical thinker resists this trap by consciously seeking disconfirming evidence, by asking not "how is this right?" but "how might this be wrong?" This shift in questioning breaks the spell of certainty and opens the door to genuine learning. Equally influential is the anchoring bias, where the first piece of information encountered becomes the reference point for all subsequent judgments. For instance, the first price mentioned in negotiation often anchors the discussion, even if it's arbitrary. The antidote is awareness, reminding oneself that the first impression is not always the most accurate one. By recalibrating perspective, the thinker regains control from the subconscious anchor. Another common distortion is the availability heuristic, where the mind overestimates the importance of information that is easiest to recall. Dramatic events, plane crashes, celebrity scandals, or financial collapses occupy mental space because they are vivid, not necessarily because they are common or significant. The mind mistakes visibility for probability. Critical thinkers counter this by relying on data rather than impressions, distinguishing between what feels true and what is statistically true. Similarly, the representativeness bias leads us to judge based on stereotypes or surface similarities rather than deeper evidence. We assume that if something resembles a known pattern, it must belong to it. This bias fuels prejudice, faulty reasoning, and unjustified generalization. Awareness dismantles this illusion. When one pauses to look beyond appearance, one sees individuality where bias once saw only category. The Faz-Halo effect and its counterpart, the Faz-Horn effect, distort how we evaluate people. If we perceive one positive trait, beauty, confidence, or intelligence, we unconsciously project goodness onto unrelated qualities. Conversely, one flaw can overshadow a person's virtues. These biases shape hiring decisions, relationships, and judgments of character. The critical thinker learns to separate impression from evaluation, to weigh evidence objectively rather than emotionally. Then comes the self-serving bias, which attributes success to one's ability and failure to external factors. This protects ego but hinders growth because it blinds us to our own role in mistakes. The antidote is humility and accountability, recognizing that true confidence grows not from being right but from being honest. Another distortion, the sunk cost fallacy, traps us in unwise commitments simply because we've already invested time, money, or emotion. People stay in failing projects, relationships, or careers, telling themselves they've come too far to quit. Yet, rationally, past investments are gone. They should not dictate future choices. The critical thinker cuts losses when evidence demands it, understanding that persistence without purpose is not strength but stubbornness. Likewise, our status quo bias makes us prefer the familiar over the better. Change feels risky because the brain associates familiarity with safety. But progress requires discomfort, growth requires deviation from routine. Recognizing this bias encourages courage, the willingness to evolve beyond what is known. Equally subtle is the bandwagon effect, where people adopt beliefs simply because they are popular. Social validation feels like truth, but majority opinion is often more reflective of emotion than evidence. History is full of collective errors, financial bubbles, cultural fads, moral panics, all driven by the desire to belong rather than to think. The critical thinker values independence over conformity, willing to stand alone in pursuit of truth. They understand that reason often begins where consensus ends, that as Dunning-Kruger effect, another psychological trap, describes how those with limited knowledge overestimate their competence, while true experts often underestimate theirs. This bias thrives on ignorance. The less we know, the more certain we feel. Awareness of this phenomenon breeds intellectual humility, the recognition that learning never ends and certainty is often the enemy of wisdom. Emotions also feed cognitive bias. An affective bias occurs when mood colors judgment. Optimism can blind us to risk, while pessimism can paralyze potential. The critical thinker balances emotion with reason, neither suppressing feeling nor surrendering to it. They ask, is my emotion informing this judgment or distorting it? Similarly, our projection bias leads us to assume others think and feel as we do, which damages empathy and communication. Recognizing diversity of thought liberates us from this bias, allowing genuine understanding to replace assumption. Hindsight bias, the illusion that outcomes were predictable all along, distorts how we learn from the past. It breeds arrogance and prevents accurate reflection. The wise thinker resists the urge to rewrite memory, acknowledging the uncertainty that existed at the time of decision. Even intelligence itself can amplify bias if not tempered by awareness. The smarter the person, the more skilled they become at rationalizing emotions and defending beliefs. Intelligence without humility becomes self-deception refined. Thus, true critical thinkers pair knowledge with self-skepticism. They do not trust every thought simply because it feels intelligent. They examine reasoning as rigorously as they examine evidence. They maintain what philosophers call epistemic humility, the awareness that human perception is limited and that truth often lies beyond immediate comprehension. Combating cognitive bias requires both strategy and discipline. Techniques include deliberate reflection, exposure to opposing viewpoints, and reliance on structured reasoning frameworks. For example, listing pros and cons, using statistical analysis, or employing the devil's advocate method all help counter mental distortion. Journaling decisions and outcomes provides a mirror for the mind, revealing patterns of bias over time. Mindfulness also aids this battle, for a present mind notices the subtle emotional triggers that precede bias. Bias thrives in haste but weakens under reflection. Therefore, slowing down thought is itself a tool of truth. Surrounding oneself with diverse thinkers and welcoming criticism further weakens bias, for no single mind can see its own blind spots. Yet, the goal is not to eliminate bias completely, an impossible task, but to recognize and reduce its influence. Bias is woven into the fabric of human cognition. Awareness is the means of softening its distortion. The critical thinker transforms bias from master to messenger, using it to understand the mind's vulnerabilities. Each time bias is identified and corrected, self-awareness deepens, reasoning sharpens, and judgment becomes more authentic. Ultimately, mastering cognitive bias is not about becoming perfectly rational, but about becoming consciously human, aware of the limits of perception yet committed to expanding them. In this humility and vigilance lies true wisdom, for the thinker who knows their own bias stands closer to truth than the one who believes they have none. Chapter 14. Decision-making is the ultimate expression of thought, the point where analysis meets action, where ideas transition into outcomes that shape the course of our lives. Every choice, whether monumental or minute, is a reflection of our reasoning, values, and awareness. To master critical thinking, one must master the art of decision-making, a process that is neither mechanical nor purely emotional, but an intricate dance between logic, intuition, and circumstance. The quality of one's life is largely determined by the quality of one's decisions, yet most people make decisions reactively, guided by impulse, habit, or fear rather than deliberate thought. Critical decision-making, therefore, begins with mindfulness, the awareness that every decision carries consequences, that every option represents a path, and that wisdom lies not in choosing quickly, but in choosing well. The first step toward mastery is understanding that decision-making is not a single event, but a structured process, a journey from problem recognition to reflection on results. It requires both analysis and empathy, detachment and courage, reason and vision. At its foundation, effective decision-making starts with clarity. One must define the problem before attempting to solve it. Many poor decisions arise not from lack of intelligence, but from misunderstanding what is truly at stake. The critical thinker asks, what exactly is the decision I am making? What are the real variables, and what assumptions am I carrying? Clarity transforms confusion into comprehension. Once the problem is clear, the next step is gathering information. The mind must resist the temptation to act on limited or biased data, facts, perspectives, and probabilities must all be considered. However, it is equally crucial to recognize that more information does not always mean better decisions. Sometimes over-analysis leads to paralysis. Thus, wisdom lies in balance, enough knowledge to inform judgment, but not so much that action becomes impossible. The ability to filter relevant from irrelevant data is a mark of a mature thinker. From there, the process moves to evaluating alternatives. Decision-making is not about discovering one perfect option, but comparing multiple plausible ones through the lens of logic, ethics, and desired outcomes. This requires foresight, the ability to project possible futures based on each choice. The thinker asks, what are the short-term and long-term effects of each option? What costs, benefits, and trade-offs accompany each path? What unseen consequences might arise? This step transforms guesswork into strategy. The critical mind uses both deductive reasoning, working from principles, and inductive reasoning, working from patterns, to test each possibility. In this stage, one must also be wary of emotional bias. Fear, pride, and impatience often distort perception. The mind must cultivate objectivity, the ability to observe emotion without letting it dictate choice. Emotion can inform decisions but should never dominate them. Next comes commitment, the act of choosing. Decision-making without action is merely contemplation. The critical thinker understands that perfect certainty rarely exists. Thus, confidence must often be built on incomplete information. At this juncture, courage is essential. The courage to act in the face of uncertainty, to accept responsibility for outcomes, and to learn from the results regardless of success or failure. Many people delay decisions indefinitely, waiting for the right moment. But indecision is itself a decision, a choice to surrender control to circumstance. Critical thinking empowers proactive decision-making, guided by principle rather than panic. Once a decision is made, execution should follow with discipline and focus. A good decision poorly implemented is as ineffective as a poor decision well executed. Consistency and follow-through transform thought into achievement. However, the process does not end with action. Reflection is the final, and perhaps most important, stage of decision-making. It closes the loop between experience and wisdom. After each major choice, the critical thinker asks, what did I expect to happen? What actually happened? Why did the result differ from the expectation? What can I learn to improve future decisions? This reflective discipline converts experience into insight, preventing repetition of error and deepening understanding of cause and effect. Through this process, decision-making evolves from instinct to art, from reaction to mastery. One of the greatest challenges in decision-making is managing uncertainty. The future is unknowable, and the brain dislikes ambiguity. To cope, it often constructs false certainty through assumptions or wishful thinking. The wise thinker accepts uncertainty as natural and seeks to make the best possible decision with the information available rather than waiting for perfect clarity. This acceptance transforms fear into flexibility. Another challenge lies in managing pressure. Many decisions occur under stress, where time constraints, social expectations, or emotional stakes cloud reasoning. In these moments, calmness becomes a superpower. The ability to pause, breathe, and think before acting allows clarity to triumph over chaos. The disciplined mind can slow down time within itself, assessing calmly while others react impulsively. Ethics also play a central role in decision-making. Every choice carries moral weight, whether personal or professional. Critical thinkers understand that the right decision is not always the easiest or most profitable, but the one most aligned with integrity. Ethical decision-making requires self-honesty, asking not only, what will I gain, but what kind of person will this decision make me? This awareness transforms decision-making from mere problem-solving into character-building. The wise thinker measures choices not just by external results, but by internal harmony, the peace that comes from acting in alignment with one's values. Furthermore, context shapes decision quality. Decisions made in isolation often overlook the complexity of real-world systems. A business decision affects employees, customers, and communities, A personal decision affects family and self-perception. Systems thinking, the ability to see connections and interdependencies, elevates decision-making from narrow to holistic. It prevents unintended consequences and nurtures sustainable outcomes. In this broader view, decision-making becomes an act of stewardship, an awareness that every choice ripples outward. Another essential dimension is intuition. While critical thinking emphasizes logic, intuition, the subconscious synthesis of experience, has its place. The best decisions often arise from a balance between reason and intuition. Logic tests the validity of options, intuition senses harmony and timing. The critical thinker does not reject intuition, but refines it through experience, ensuring that gut feelings are guided by knowledge rather than impulse. Decision-making mastery also demands emotional resilience. Not every decision will yield success, and not every path will prove correct. The key is to treat each outcome as feedback, not failure. The mature thinker views mistakes as teachers, not as sources of shame. This mindset prevents fear of failure from paralyzing growth. The goal is not infallibility but continuous improvement, each decision sharper, wiser, more self-aware than the last. Ultimately, decision-making mastery is the intersection of clarity, courage, and conscience. It is the art of thinking deeply, choosing wisely, and acting boldly. Each decision becomes an expression of identity, a reflection of one's inner order projected into the outer world. When guided by reason, integrity, and awareness, decisions cease to be random reactions. They become deliberate steps toward purpose. To think critically is to decide consciously. To decide consciously is to live intentionally. Thus, the critical thinker transforms decision-making from a daily necessity into a lifelong discipline, crafting a life not of chance but of choice, not of confusion but of clarity, and not of regret but of wisdom. Chapter 15. The final and perhaps most transformative aspect of critical thinking mastery lies in the realm of personal improvement. Using the power of awareness, logic, and reflection not merely to solve problems but to elevate the self. True mastery of thought is not achieved when one becomes skilled at argument or analysis, but when one learns to apply critical thinking inwardly, to understand and refine the patterns that govern one's own mind, emotions, and actions. The human brain, magnificent in potential yet limited by habit, often becomes a prisoner of its own conditioning. We think the same thoughts, react in the same ways, and justify the same errors because we rarely pause to examine the machinery of our thinking. Personal improvement begins with this examination, with the courage to look inward and ask, why do I think the way I do? What assumptions shape my worldview? What fears distort my decisions? What stories do I tell myself to protect my comfort rather than expand my understanding? When critical thinking turns inward, it becomes not just a mental skill but a spiritual discipline, one that transforms confusion into clarity and chaos into coherence. To improve oneself through critical thinking means developing as metacognition, the ability to think about one's thinking. This self-awareness allows an individual to observe thoughts without being controlled by them, to detect bias before it blinds, and to question emotional impulses before they dictate behavior. Instead of being swept away by every passing emotion or belief, the thinker learns to pause, analyze, and choose a response consciously. This shift from reaction to reflection marks the beginning of personal mastery. It is the difference between living mechanically and living deliberately. The critical thinker understands that the mind is not a fixed entity but a dynamic system, capable of being trained, expanded, and refined. Every time one questions an automatic assumption, one carves a new neural pathway toward greater awareness. Every time one replaces a self-limiting belief with evidence-based reasoning, one rewires the brain toward empowerment. In this sense, critical thinking becomes mental fitness, an exercise in cognitive strength and emotional endurance. However, self-improvement through critical thinking is not about cold rationality or emotional suppression. It is about balance. Emotion, when understood rather than avoided, becomes an ally rather than an adversary. The critical thinker learns to interpret emotions as data, signals that reveal inner states or unfulfilled needs. Anger might indicate a boundary violated, fear might signal uncertainty about the unknown, and sadness might express loss or misalignment. Instead of suppressing these emotions, the thinker examines them with curiosity. What is this emotion trying to tell me? Is it based on truth or perception? This analytical empathy deepens self-understanding and enhances emotional intelligence. Critical thinking and emotional intelligence, when combined, produce a mind both sharp and compassionate, a mind capable of making wise choices without losing its humanity. A major barrier to personal improvement is the ego, the self's desire to be right, validated, and superior. The ego resists self-examination because it thrives on certainty and control. Critical thinking threatens it by introducing doubt and humility. Yet true growth begins when the ego is dethroned and curiosity takes its place. The critical thinker embraces uncertainty as a teacher and feedback as fuel. Instead of defending beliefs, they test them. Instead of fearing error, they seek to learn from it. This mindset converts failure into instruction and criticism into guidance. The person who thinks critically about themselves does not ask, "How can I prove I am right?" but "How can I become better?" Such humility is not weakness. It is the foundation of evolution. It transforms the self from a static identity into an ongoing process of refinement. Another pillar of personal growth is intellectual integrity, the willingness to follow evidence wherever it leads, even when it challenges one's comfort or ego. Many people cling to comforting illusions because truth can be inconvenient or painful, but avoidance does not prevent suffering, it prolongs it. The critical thinker understands that growth demands confrontation with one's fears, flaws, and contradictions. To live truthfully is to face discomfort with courage. When a person accepts responsibility for their thoughts and outcomes, they regain power. No longer a victim of circumstance, they become a creator of meaning. Every obstacle becomes an opportunity for insight. Every mistake becomes material for wisdom. This attitude transforms adversity from punishment into teacher and pain into progress. Personal improvement through critical thinking also involves mastering decision-making habits and mental environments. The thinker learns to distinguish between what can be controlled and what cannot. Worry and regret drain mental energy because they focus on what is beyond influence. The critical thinker redirects attention toward what can be changed: actions, attitudes, and perceptions. This focus cultivates resilience, the ability to adapt and recover from challenge. Resilience is not denial of hardship, but the art of rising intelligently from it. The mind trained in critical thought views setbacks as data points, not verdicts, as temporary states, not permanent identities. Through reflection and analysis, patterns of self-sabotage are identified and replaced with patterns of growth. For example, procrastination may be traced to perfectionism, perfectionism to fear, and fear to a distorted belief about self-worth. By identifying root causes rather than symptoms, the thinker dismantles the architecture of limitation. Critical thinking also enhances personal relationships. It fosters empathy through perspective taking, the ability to see situations from another's point of view. Instead of reacting defensively, the critical thinker listens actively, questions assumptions, and seeks understanding before judgment. This reduces conflict and builds trust. Moreover, critical thinkers avoid manipulation by recognizing logical fallacies, emotional appeals, and cognitive traps in communication. They learn to navigate both external persuasion and internal rationalization with clarity. This emotional and intellectual maturity strengthens both independence and connection, the ability to stand firm in one's principles while remaining open to others' truths. A vital component of personal improvement is goal alignment. Many people chase goals inherited from culture or comparison rather than those aligned with their authentic values. Critical thinking helps differentiate between external expectations and internal purpose. The thinker examines motives critically. Am I pursuing this goal because it fulfills me or because it pleases others? Does this ambition align with who I want to become? Through this analysis, the individual reclaims authorship of their life narrative. The journey becomes intentional, not accidental. Clarity of purpose generates motivation rooted in meaning, and this sense of direction transforms discipline from effort into joy. Yet, even as one grows, critical thinking reminds the mind to stay humble. Knowledge is infinite, understanding is provisional. The deeper one explores, the more one realizes how much remains unknown. This humility keeps growth continuous and ego in check. The critical thinker does not seek final perfection, but perpetual evolution. They recognize that improvement is not a destination, but a lifelong dialogue between experience and awareness. Ultimately, the fusion of critical thinking and personal improvement leads to self-mastery, the ability to live consciously, make wise decisions, and evolve continuously. The individual becomes both scientist and subject, observer and participant in their own transformation. Each thought becomes a tool for refinement, each challenge a test of wisdom, each day a new experiment in living intelligently. Such a person radiates clarity, calm, and confidence not because life is easy, but because their mind is disciplined, their emotions integrated, and their actions deliberate. In this state, critical thinking transcends technique and becomes philosophy, a way of being grounded in truth, guided by reason and elevated by purpose. To master thought is to master self is to master life. And thus, the journey of critical thinking concludes not with the acquisition of knowledge, but with the awakening of wisdom. The realization that the mind, when disciplined and aware, is the most powerful instrument of transformation the human being possesses.